This Week in Science and Education is presented in association with the Science Coordinators and Consultants Association of Ontario. Visit their website at SCCAO.ca.
This Week in Science and Education is brought to you in part by the University of Western Ontario, www.uwo.ca. We thank them for their support. This Week in Science and Education is also brought to you by Laurentian University. Check out Laurentian at laurentian.ca. We thank them for their support.
Thanks to everybody for joining us here. This is going to be episode 54 of This Week in Science and Education. Usually on our episodes, there's myself, Kevin Kugler, who's one of the managers of VROC, and Thomas Merritt, Dr. Thomas Merritt, who's a geneticist at Laurentian University. We connect through video conferencing with another fourth site that is usually a university researcher of some description. We've talked to all kinds of different people, cancer researchers, we've talked to geneticists, we've talked to astronomers, we've talked to explorers, just you name it, we've talked to a whole bunch of different people. Like I said, this is episode 54 for us. We've been doing it for over a year now. It's been a lot of fun. And today, because we're on location at SCCAO, at the conference here, it's an opportunity to sort of start a new twist on the venture. The This Week in Science and Education podcast is now going to be officially presented in association with SCCAO, the Science Consultants and Coordinators Organization of Ontario, because we're doing similar things. We're on similar paths. We've got similar goals. And as VROC continues to evolve their educational offerings and the wrappers for the educational offerings, it's a better and better fit. And so it's really great that VROC was here today and that we're here with some of the SCCAO exec, and we're going to have a little bit of a discussion. We're not going to talk very long, maybe just over 20 minutes or so, but we're going to give you guys an opportunity as well to be part of this. If you have a question, you want to add a comment, just like we were doing today, fire your hand up and we can integrate that, no problem. What we're going to talk about today, and I've got three illustrious guests with me here. Okay, I'm going to introduce them. People in the room know them, but this is Sean Hanna from the District School Board of Niagara, Christine Adam-Carr from the Ottawa Catholic District School Board, and Rick Pardo from Thames Valley. They've got a grip. That's awesome.
Yeah, exactly.
Who knew? That's wicked. That's great. What we're going to talk about today is, we've had a conversation at our meeting today about safety. We're going to talk a little bit more about safety. And I think we're going to sort of kick it off with the focus on we're all sort of consultants, I guess, science consultants and other things is what we have in our roles. But we want to talk a little bit about the importance of safety, but then also what school boards are doing in terms of safety in science classrooms, and what science teachers are doing in terms of safety in science classrooms. And we'll sort of take it from there. So maybe we'll just go down the line here, and we'll start with Sean, and just talk about maybe what's going on in your board real briefly, and sort of where you see it going.
Thanks, Colin. At the District School Board of Niagara, I think we're in line with a lot of the folks I had conversation with today, where the health and safety officer has realized that, oh boy, there's a bit of a disconnect between perhaps what legislation is requiring, etc., and where are we? And so they're in an information gathering phase right now, and they're really happy to see that the Stay Safe on Science resource, the Ontario Fire Marshal resource, and the upcoming Fire Safety Resource Guide that we saw today from Dennis McGowan, those things are all aligning, and those things are really going to be taken into account as they try to really form what a plan is to move forward. Because besides having basic women's training for all staff, an MSDS on site, etc., and training on PPE and those kinds of things, they know that it's not really being 100% compliant, and they want to have a plan to move forward. And so hopefully their budget's going to help make it happen in a meaningful way.
When you say 100% compliant, what do you mean by that? Compliant with what, and who needs to be compliant as to what?
That's a really good question. I didn't know all those things, and so the more that I talk with people around SCCAO, I find out, did you consider this? Have you figured out that? And that's half the battle, finding out really what are the rules that we're within, or that we have to be compliant with. And as we find out that sometimes WMIS is being compliant every 3 years, other people are doing it every year, etc. What do we do with occasional teachers or long-term occasionals who are filling in, etc.? And so it's a challenge to find out really what needs to be compliant. That's where I'm also letting the health and safety officer know what we have as a province and as SCCAO to say, here's your resources, but then also to them to say, now you need to also do some research with your other folks in OASBO, etc., to say, what are you doing as a group so that there's a united front, so every school board doesn't have to try to replicate and solve the puzzle on their own?
Right, very cool. Christine, I know, I've talked to you for a number of years about this, and I know this. I see Ottawa Catholic as leading the way in a lot of ways in terms of safety and what you guys do. Can you give us a sort of an update on where you guys have been and where you are now in terms of your science safety?
Yeah, well, I think probably a lot of it started, as a teacher in the classroom. I think when you move into sort of a central position, you bring a lot of those concerns with you. And I recall back when I first started teaching, coming into a chem lab and trying to do something, and there wasn't ventilation. Chemicals were all over the place, teachers' desks, beside the lunches. We're looking at it.
All the lunches.
Yeah. We knew it wasn't good, but we didn't really have the tools to do anything about it because the people that we were complaining to, we weren't being heard. And it just, some of us were wanting to shut down labs almost to try and get some response. And so when I started in the central role about 6 years ago, one of the first things I did was I went to the health and safety officer and said, let's talk, because I've got a lot of concerns and I want to know how we can move forward. Because I really saw it as filling the gaps between the occupational health and safety officer's job, which is to take care of employees, and us as teachers wanting to take care of students. And the more I get into it, the more I realize that's really where the gap has been, and in many ways it kind of still is, because everything, even Ministry of Labor, their language is employee, but we care about the kids. We know what's good for employees is good for kids, but how do we bridge that gap, and how do we make sure that things are happening? And depending on the different groups you talk to, what I've learned, a lot of people out there are working on a philosophy of let's scare people into compliance.
How's that working for them?
They just shut down. Teachers don't want to hear that. They don't want to work under a structure like that, and we're professionals. We don't need to be scared into compliance. We do the right thing because we want to do the right thing for kids. And so I think a big part of my role has always been trying to do the right thing, but I'm trying to make the job of a teacher easier. I look at what needs to be done. I look at all the must-dos that are coming down from all over the place. And if at the end of the day, I can't look at the kinds of things I'm trying to do as also how can I make this required easier to fulfill, then I've got to go back to the drawing board and rethink how to do this. So that's what's kind of been driving a lot of the changes. So there's a lot out there. It took 5 years to get here.
Right.
So one piece at a time.
We'll talk about some of those specific pieces in a little bit. Rick, what are your thoughts on sort of where Thames Valley is?
Well, with Thames Valley, when the discussions started on this in earnest, I would say last spring, when some accidents had happened, a lot of the discussion was around how to prevent accidents and what to do with hazardous waste.
Right.
And in the discussion since then, what it's turned into, we've pulled in custodial plant, physical plant, health and safety. Now it's turned into all materials. It's materials management issue, handling and management. How do we receive them? How do we store them? How do we use them safely? What do we do with the waste, and how do we store the waste? And then finally dispose. So cradle to grave, when anything that comes in the building, everything from toner to paper. And we've also pulled in, we're also now looking at pulling in, and we are pulling in, the environmental regulations that don't even come up in the things that we quoted before, right? There's waste audits, for example, that have to be, that is law. A lot of our school, well, I can't speak a lot of them. I know that our school board has thought of environmental clubs as being nice things to have. And have a recycling program is, yes, that would be nice, but it's not literacy or numeracy, therefore it's not worth funding. So, but it's the law. And part of my role has been to make that clearer to the people that have responsibility with money, to make sure that that actually happens, right? And it's been put to me, and not too crudely, is how do we keep them out of jail?
Yeah.
How do we keep the executive, the school board out of jail? How do we keep the trustees out of jail? And that's what it comes down to.
Well, that's a really interesting question. I was talking with some folks earlier today around the who's liable question, right? Like if I'm a classroom teacher, and something happens in my lab, but in the course of an investigation, it's because there's a ton of things I didn't know I was supposed to know. Who's responsible? Right? So that's a huge question, but throw it out to the audience as well. I mean, yes, as a teacher, the Education Act says we have to do everything in our power to keep students safe. right? They're paraphrasing, but that's what it is. That's our job. But around things like chemical storage, or around things like what chemicals have been ordered or are still there from the past and what I can and can't use, there's a ton of stuff to know. And where does the buck stop? Like, does it go to trustees? Will it end at the school level? Yeah.
It's about informing. One of the approach that we're going to be looking at is looking at bringing in an outside consultant, environmental consultant, to go through the legislation and say, as a functioning school board, because we're considered, what's the phrase? We're actually considered in industrial sites, industrial workplaces. But that has a different interpretation depending on the industrial workplace. We're a school. What does that? We need someone to interpret that, to take that legislation, all the various pieces and everything that comes that may influence it. What does that mean? What does that look like? Once we have a firm picture of that, then we can go back and do a gap analysis and say, where are we now? If this is where we need to be, then where are we now? Right. It's the same thing we do with the kids. That stuff we did this morning on inquiry, it's the same thing. What do we expect? What's the expected practice? Well, that needs to be clear. Right. We need to co-construct the success criteria, right? And that's the co-construction is the other part of this, because that came to the implementation. The old model is, here's what you need to do. Bring somebody in to scare everybody, saying you're going to be sued, you're going to be sued, you're going to be sued, and put it all back down on the employee's head, cherry picking from pieces of legislation that basically pass the buck. Right. A lot of finger pointing and this goes on. How do we get past that? Right. And what's hard to do is you've got people that are in positions that are used to being top-down policy. This is what you need to do. Therefore, if you don't do it, you're the one liable. Right. Versus what I think most of us would agree. Our approach is let's involve people in the solution. The teachers that are actually using those chemicals have to be part of the solution. And it's got to be custom fit to the environments that they're in, the actual workplace that they're working in. Right.
So, and I know with our school board, there's a safety committee that's composed of exactly some of the people you talked to, the facilities folks, some of the administration folks, teachers, science department heads, who are starting that conversation as well. Probably much like you guys are, Shauna, in your board. Okay, what do we need to do? Like, what don't we know? And then go from there.
This Week in Science and Education is brought to you by Sheridan Institute of Technology and Advanced Learning. At Sheridan, students shine brighter. Check out sheridanc.on.ca.
What do you say to a teacher then who has a question in terms of what can and can't I do? Because one of the things that very often you hear is, well, then we just won't do labs. We won't do activities because you've scared the pants off of me and I'm not going to do it, right? So how do you start to bridge that gap to help teachers that it's okay to do labs, but there's things you need to know? Where do you start with that, Sean? What do you?
Well, I respond first of all saying, okay, so you're a teacher, so you have now professional judgment, and so you officially have training to be a teacher. You know, hopefully certified for science teaching. It's a whole other question when it's the phys ed person teaching a section off, grade 9 academic, a one-off. But if it's a science-trained teacher, then it's a conversation hopefully for them to feel comfortable and to bounce ideas off of their in-school team and supportive there, because they're the day-to-day team, I would hazard to say, back and forth. Sometimes administrators make great decisions about certain things, but they're probably not the specialist in knowing what chemicals should be stored where and everything else. So I temper the first thing before you go straight to your principal to say, do you want me to do this or not? It's a great place to go to your science department and say, has anyone ever done this demo before? Have, what would you suggest, etc. And being the first line of going to find out, and hopefully there they can get a lot of their answers met from the experiences within their building.
Cool. What do you think?
I find that the board safety guidelines really help a lot with stuff like that. It's sort of the place that I lean on, because a lot of the questions that I end up getting fielded can be answered with different segments from there. And the other thing with the teacher who wants to shut down, that's a one teacher at a time conversation, a one-on-one. You sit down with them, you try and explore where the fears are coming from, and you try and come up to something that they're going to be comfortable with. I mean, if they literally have that much fear, well,
there's not much.
You need to find out exactly, so what is it specifically that they're concerned about, and a lot of times that can be dealt with as, say, in a one-on-one sort of situation.
You just mentioned board safety guidelines. Talk a little bit about that, because we've had some conversations today around safety, and just like many things in education, it seems we're all over the map. We're all in different places in terms of what we have in our individual school boards for safety guidelines. What do you guys have in Ottawa, Catholic?
It was based on a pre-amalgamation safety guideline from one of our predecessor boards. So the last time that was revised was in like 89. So I found an old hard copy, of course not available in soft copy anymore. But I think the big thing is to have something to start with. And then from there it just kind of grows. And a lot of it came about with, we had these annual outside audits done of all of our labs to sort of see where are we. Because I think without something like that, it's really hard to say what is your baseline. And so what we were looking for from year over year over year is just progress in that audit. We're not expecting to do everything overnight, but just progress. And those audits then, in looking at those, you can kind of see, okay, these are the hot spots that we need to deal with right now. And then that would be what formed some of the stuff that's in there. So it's, you know, student checklists, teacher checklists, classroom checklists. It's about 30 pages, so trying not to let it be any more than that. It includes training records, a whole variety of different things, how to respond to different situations, who to call for what. That seems to be the big thing.
It's a great resource from what if that existed within our school board, it would solve, I would think, 3/4 of the emails and phone calls that I get, because we don't have that exact document. So they come to me and they ask, and I do my best due diligence to find out the answer. And I think to myself, it would be great if there was in every school this resource that said, this is exactly where this chemical should be stored, how it gets disposed of, et cetera, and the rationale for it.
So you don't have a board-specific science
not for
guideline.
just not
so
for
you can fall back to things like the SCCAO resources and things like that, but you don't have one specific. Rick, you guys have?
Just because Christine shared hers with, and that was an excellent, wonderful starting point. Okay. I mean, the SCCAO guidelines again are the SOS is an excellent guide. It only goes so far because when you're writing a document for the entire province, there's so many local bylaws and things and restrictions that you have to consider. It can only take you to a certain point. And it has to be discussed from, so it's a good discussion point. It organizes the topic. So it's not, well, what do you guys think about safety? Right? You don't show up at a meeting one day and go, what do you guys think? Right? Or else it ends up, it's so large. It's such a big, and you have to consider so many voices. But bringing people to the table to have that conversation, at least having someone else's attempt at it as a starting point and let them tear it apart. There's a lot of value in tearing something apart and then putting it back together, right? And that has to be, it can't just be done now with a select group of department heads that happen to be chemistry enthusiasts. You've got to take that and spread it to everybody that's going to potentially touch a science lab, right? It has to, they have to be brought into it.
And that's where we're trying to go with our health and safety officer. They've tried to say, okay, well, let's make a policy manual and then it'll be compliant.
Right.
Yes. We'll put it online, and then we can be compliant. We said to them, well, if you're going to go through all that trouble of doing that, then there has to be a process of ongoing training and support to actually have teachers open up the document
that was my next question.
and look at it so that they're aware of what's in there and it's out of use. Right?
And it is in partnership with the SCCAO document. Like our document by itself doesn't stand alone.
Right.
It's framed around the SCCAO now SOS document. So neither one by itself would work, and so it's taking everything that SCCAO does and just sort of taking it for a couple of areas, mostly chemical handling and training stuff that's very board specific because of municipal restrictions and all kinds of stuff like that. And okay, this is how we deal with these things here. But absolutely, the SCCAO one is like the #1 piece.
Well, and the videos that we saw today.
The new ones.
The new videos that came out that Maureen Kellett was got funding for and pushed for. Through the ministry, those are amazing, and they will be a great resource, and I would just encourage to do more and more of those, like how to prepare various solutions. Rather than having procedures, Chris, you and I talked about having a written procedure for everything. What about having a video procedure? It's all, it's a YouTube world, right? People are going to the YouTube to see how to do things. They can stop it, review it, right? Would be a wonderful resource for a department head to be able to, if they don't have that. I mean, myself, I had a physics background, but I had relied on the chemistry person to answer those questions. They didn't have that responsibility other than the professional, something that they would hold as having the background to be able to manage that. So I would encourage more and more that we can do as a collective group. So organizations like SCCAO and SCCAO, if we can share this stuff, the previous month, I'm still amazed at some of the resources we present. My supervisors would there are some that would suggest that we put that behind that iron curtain. It goes behind the firewall.
Yes, so no one else can see it.
So no one else can see it.
It's proprietary.
This is, and it's proprietary, and I don't know who's paying for it, because, you know, they maybe say they'll sell 2 copies for $50 each.
Right.
It's not, it's,
Right.
right, it's not that, it's not a cash cow,
No.
Yeah.
right?
It's education, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Resources like that don't make a whole lot of money. They cost a lot of money though, but they don't make a whole lot of money, right? Which is great with the SCCAO resource. Correct, those aren't posted yet, correct me if I'm wrong, folks, and they'll be up in a little while on the SCCAO website, is that correct? Okay, thank you. Yeah.
And the other thing, I'm just gonna throw something.
Yeah, please.
Using things from other boards, is there a resistance to use something else that's got somebody else's logo on it?
Well, we just, not for some of us, we just redid our science, well, redid, 10-year process to revise our program safety manual, like all of it, for outdoor ed and phys ed and tech and science, like everything, just, it's this big. But through the sharing of folks like Christine and some of the other boards, we've pulled the best thinking from other people, modified it, and made our own version. So when you share, that kind of good stuff happens. Everybody, it just gets better and better all the time. But not everybody does that. There are some people that I work with that we should just do it in-house and it's ours and we'll do it ourselves because we know best. Well, you're not as smart as the group when you get everything together. So it goes both ways, I think.
I've got a couple of comments on that.
Please, yeah.
One of them is, I know one of the boards I asked to borrow some stuff, and they were happy to loan it to me and use it any way I wanted, but they asked that I remove all reference to their board from the document. And the reason for that, I figured out, was they were concerned about future liability issues, because when we're talking about safety, right? So I think that's something, if you have some stuff that you want to share, it's probably a question that needs to be asked in your home board. If I share this out, do you want us to be acknowledged, or would you rather our name be removed from everything, right? So there's 2 sides to that. And then the other thing that was interesting in working with one of the consulting firms that we had hired, that person had suggested that I should not share our stuff unless it's PDF'd and unmodifiable and all the rest of it. And I'm just like,
Because people can't type.
You're really not an educator, are you?
Yeah.
It just seems so foreign to me to consider
Yeah.
looking at it that way. But anyway, those are just 2
No,
things
but
to be
people
thinking
do.
about as we talk about sharing. Because in our earlier discussions, I know there were at least 4 or 5 boards that I was aware of, just from the posters, that had developed their own in-house guides. I'd love to see them. You know, just, hey, maybe there's something in there that I've missed or whatever. You know, that's what we do.
Yeah.
We're constructing our own knowledge. It's what we want our kids to do. We want to do it too.
We want to model collaboration, creativity, critical thinking, and by taking something else, pulling out the pieces that are relevant to you, you're doing exactly that. So it's modeling this mythical 21st century learning environment that we're supposed to be living in right now. So we need to work that way. Listen, I had one more thing I wanted to talk about that just sort of occurred to me as we went through this. New teachers, new teacher training, hot topic to think about. But when a student teacher comes out of the faculty and then a new teacher gets hired, A, are they aware of safety issues? B, are they well trained? Because I'm going to talk for myself for a second. When I graduated and I started teaching, I didn't know anything about things like chemical storage. I mean, I was smart enough to know I had to be safe and there was things I needed to know. But I was never taught that. It was a learning on the job kind of thing. What do you guys think about what faculties maybe should be doing with teachers?
I'm going to hope that the faculties are using the SCCAO materials and will make use of those fire safety videos. I think if they did that, that would be a great start. Because the other part of it is just like, you know, if you need fall arrest training, your employer has to be the one that offers it to you because it has to be site specific. So I think a big part of it will always fall to the boards to do.
Sure.
Does it fall under NTIP? It doesn't in my board.
No.
Of course, everybody in this
Probably
room would
could.
suggest it probably should, but that's a whole other can of worms. I've noticed in my board that department heads are starting to be very quick with letting me know, I've got a new teacher, can you make sure they get blah, 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 blah,
Oh,
as
that's
soon as
excellent.
possible. So that, I think that comes as a later stage.
But that speaks to the capacity you've built in your system around an understanding of safety and the processes you have. And when a new person comes in, the department head knows what they don't know,
Yeah.
and then they need to get that help.
Yeah. Well, when you mention NTIP, for example, right, there you go back to the legislation, fire protection and prevention, they have to be trained within the first 3 months. So, right, so that kind of falls within NTIP. So there's that legislation lever, if you will,
Yeah.
that should be included in a science NTIP program.
Awesome. Well, listen, hot topic, speaking of fire safety.
Yeah.
We'll keep it short this week. I appreciate your time. I really appreciate the thought put into things. Today's was a great day. I appreciate everybody's thoughts and time today. It's really cool that now that SCCAO and VROC are a little more tightly joined here with the podcast. You'll find it on the SCCAO website as well as the VROC website. We're going to start embedding that on a weekly basis when they get put there, so you'll be able to find this material all over the web, right? So use it with your students, use it with your teachers, and use us and use VROC, and because we're all better together. Okay, so on behalf of Kevin, who's in Spain at the moment on a beach somewhere, and the absent Dr. Thomas Merritt, I'm Colin Jagoe for This Week in Science and Education. We'll see you next week. Thank you very much.